Well, it's not like I made a video about non-Swedish guns, but I was kinda hoping for anything except American weapons. As to why I'm against having American guns is that GC is a very niche game set in Sweden towards the end of the Cold War. While Sweden did have American imports, it was only medium and heavy machine guns and a grenade launcher. We did however have the KG M-37 or the Browning automatic rifle, but historically the weapons presented in the pack were never used by Sweden. And I feel as US guns takes away from the unique aspects of GC, because I'd rather not have the America saves the world trope in the game. It's overused and boring. Obviously it's too late to complain and the US guns will come either way, but if for whatever reason the US Army becomes main ally, then I'm uninstalling the game and write it off as another soulless cash grab that alienates the game from its original feeling and alienates the player from ever experiencing something original. And it isn't much of the dev's fault, as it is the community to adapt herd mentality that shuts out any reasoning, forms a cult mentality and slowly drains the game of useful feedback. Something I often see on the GC forums is if you say something negative about the game, even if you bring good points about its faults, then you're a hater. Example, as long as it's any new content I don't care, and I especially don't care about the naysayers. That's how you kill the tone. That's how you kill the game, by adding things without reason or add stuff that is barely good by ignoring constructive criticism. Like Melee, there wouldn't really be a reason for GC to have American guns like the M16, especially since the M16 is one of the most common weapons in video games. So adding it to GC feels wrong when there's plenty of other weapons that could have been used instead. For American gun lovers, if you are excited about this pack, then all the power to you, but let me give you some reasons to the relations of America and Sweden during the 80s. However, one thing I must mention before the video start is that I must reaffirm that most of my problems with the game stems from the community, especially some not being able to see the difference between hate and constructive criticism and feedback. I understand that game development takes time and effort. I am not trying to piss on the devs here, but that doesn't mean I can't be critical of the game. For instance, the content in Phoenix Rising, especially the story, felt lazily done compared to Alpine Unrest. To me, it seems that the devs are having a hard time trying to please the players who want the OG dark and grounded tone, and the player who simply don't care about what's added. So now let's get into the real stuff. Historical evidence that Sweden never used American guns. Now first, I found this document paper thing, National Security Council, Policies of the Government of the United States of America Relating to the National Security, Volume 1, 1947-1948. This document was written during it at the very start of the Cold War, and while it doesn't actually cover the end of it, it does really sum up the relations between America and Sweden. It is in the security interest of the United States that Norway, Denmark, and Sweden remain free from Soviet domination. The United States should endeavor all by appropriate measures: A. To strengthen the present tendency of Norway and Denmark to align themselves with the Western powers. B. To make perfectly clear to Sweden our dissatisfaction with its apparent failure to discriminate in its own mind and its future planning between the West and the Soviet Union. To influence Sweden to abandon this attitude of subjective neutrality and look toward eventual alignment with other Western powers in such form as may be found collectively acceptable, and at the same time to refrain from forcing Sweden into an attitude which would be unnecessarily provocative towards the Soviet Union. As one means of implementing the policy stated above, the United States should explore with the members of Western Union the problem of increasing security of Norway, Denmark, and appropriate Sweden through integration into or association in form of the Brussels Treaty system or otherwise. The United States should continue to support Norway and Denmark by measures such as the following: A. Extension of economic aid by means of favorable US foreign trade policies. B. Providing the equipment first to strengthen Norway and Denmark's military posture as a deterrent to Soviet armed aggressions, and second, to enable the Norwegian and Danish forces to act physically resist an actual attack. A small amount of equipment should be furnished promptly as an immediate measure of encouragement to the Norwegian and Danish governments. Further provision of equipment should be dependent upon their participation in the Western Union or some similar collective defensive agreement, consistent with overall availability, with priorities to be established for other Western European nations. C. Aggressive commenting of communist propaganda by a vitalist, high, selective, and intensified US information program. With respect to Sweden, the United States should follow, for the time being, a policy of according priority on the limited amount of available military aid to show countries and regional groupings envisaged by in Senate Resolution 239 of June 11, 1948, Vandenberg Resolution. Sweden's requirements would be considered only after those countries which have been given indication of intention to cooperate with the US or Brussels Treaty signatories in security arrangements. It is essential that the present US base rights in Greenland be retained and extend rapidly as politically expedient. United States security interests in the Spitsbergen archipelago lie in supporting Norway in maintaining her sovereignty over these islands and preventing their military by use of a hostile power. While this was written at the start of the Cold War, it does summarize in the end that Sweden never imported American small arms, only heavy weaponry. If the devs added those weapons, then yeah, the American pack would make a whole lot of sense. As GC does take place in a splitting timeline, you can argue that UN's guns can be used, as the USA was an early member of NATO, and in general, the document that I read only describes the relations of the US and Sweden during our timeline. A personal source is my dad and his buddy who did military service in the 80s. My dad and I talked about the usage of weapons that Sweden used at the time. None of the small arms category was ever American. American weapons were never used in training or in use by the Swedish army, as Sweden had no reason to import their weapons. Here's also what my dad's buddy had to say about Sweden's industry. Sweden weapon industry was really big during the 60s and 70s. Sweden had a strong position as a manufacturer of weapons and weapon systems, at the same time as it equipped the Swedish defense against the Soviets. There were even plans for a Swedish atomic bomb for a while, but it was voted out and instead an agreement was signed to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons. Now let's go over the guns that I think that should have been used and why. World War II. Since these are guns from a different generation, they would stand out more from the current pool by looks and reload animations. I am fairly certain that people do love some good reload animations. M-42. Automatgevär M-42 is a semi-automatic rifle that wasn't widely used by the Swedish army, with about 30,000 being made for the army. Initially being designed for the 6.5 x 55mm round, however most models outside of Sweden got rechambered with the 7.62 NATO. Kar 98K. The Carabino 98 Kurz is a bolt-action rifle using the 7.92 x 57mm Mauser cartridge, was a standard service rifle for the German Wehrmacht during the Second World War. Sweden had ordered about 5,000 that had been made during the regular production run in 1939. KGM-40 is an automatic rifle used by the Swedish Army during the 40s. In design it's a bit more unique as it loads the mag from the side and in general has a nice thin design. Lahti L35. A semi-automatic pistol designed by Almo Lahti was used by Finland during the Winter and Continuation Wars. The Husqvarna M-40 is a Swedish copy that was used extensively by the Swedish military until the 80s, which would eventually be replaced by the Glock. The reason was because of frame cracks. The source being a change in steel quality, second being the use of 9x19mm M-39B ammo that was initially made for the M-45 were used in the M-40 pistol. Including this gun would be a stretch, seeing as it was taken out of service for easily breaking. Other. These are weapons from NATO countries or countries that are geographically and politically more reasonable to send Sweden weapons. Take a M55. While Finland isn't a member of NATO, they are a neighbor of Sweden and have good relations, so they could technically ship some rifles to Sweden. Anyway, the Tikka M55 is a rifle using the .304 I think. The Wikipedia lists a long list of ammo types, but some sources say it's .308. Heckler & Co. G36. Now I know what you're thinking. The G36 was designed during the early 90s. How could it possibly be in GC? Yes, that is true, and the gun never even saw service until the mid-90s, at least in the German army. This is a dumb example because in a way it contradicts what I'm saying before, but a lore reason could be that production ramped up, and since Germany is close to Sweden, they could arm the Swedish military with prototype guns, being the G36, or simply send them to the protagonist in the game. Soviet guns. While the Soviet Union was never an ally of Sweden during the Cold War, since they want to help during the game, it isn't impossible for them to send their own weaponry as to show the world how awesome the Soviets are for helping Sweden. Editor's note: in the December update, Soviet camps and soldiers can be found in parts of the farmlands, meaning we are on the way to take up a bigger part of the story. So here's the guns. Dragunov, also known as SVD. The Dragunov is a semi-automatic rifle using 7.62x55mm R developed by the Russian Empire that was introduced back in 1891. The SVD's most distinctive design features is an off-site scope of the barrel, wooden stock front barrel grip, and a curved magazine like the AK-74. SKS, a Soviet semi-automatic carbine using the 7.62x39 round. The SKS has a typical rifle layout, but its unique design feature is the internal box magazine that can be loaded by hand or from a stripper clip. The RPK, known in English as the Kalashnikov handheld gun, used the 7.62x39 round, was designed in parallel to the AKM assault rifle, in part to standardize the small arms of the Soviet army, hence the similar designs. Being in use since 1961, the RPK uses a thicker and longer barrel, with a folding bipod mounted on it. The magazines commonly used were 40 round box or 75 round drum magazine. Other weapon used by the military or police. FFV-890 was an assault rifle based on the Israeli Galili. Its final iteration, FFV-890C, was trialed by the Swedish Armed Forces to be the new 5.6x45mm NATO assault rifle. However, it ended up losing to the FN-FNC, which eventually turned into the AK-5. This resulted in the rifle never being widely adopted, but some were used by the Swedish police, so it could be potentially be in the game but quite rare, only being able to loot it from the police. Concerns about lore and meta. Now, since these weapons are getting added regardless, I have a feeling that they will just be added in, like random drops from machines. I hope that they add a really good lore reason for them to exist and perhaps tie a mission to get them. If they are drops, then it feels like a pay-to-win cash grab. But if they can nail the presentation of the weapons and give a good lore or quest about these American weapons, then I'll be less salty about them. While Generation Zero is a player versus environment game, having the ability to buy new guns is risky because we don't really know how they will affect the meta. Many people argue that since the game is PvE, then weapon packs are not pay to win. Well, they could or not. As of writing this video, we don't know anything in terms of how we're getting them. If the DLC comes out before this video, then I'll have a segment about my thoughts on them, if I was right and wrong. Now, since GC is a multiplayer game, if you can pay for something new in the meta that could give you an edge in completing various activities, doing more damage than weapons in the same level, then it's pay to win. If your character progression can be done faster by paying for this pack, this is pay to win. Since this DLC is mainly weapons, the game is putting behind new meta behind a paywall. Competitive PvE is a thing through speedruns and various other activities. Paid content would also be better suited for new islands, quests, and vanity items. Things that can affect the meta should be in free updates, because locking meta behind paywall can lead to way worse things if devs aren't careful about it. I made a video some months ago about non-Swedish weapons and Swedish World War II guns. Even though it's old, I do recommend you watch it for the full picture, but I'll summarize it. Basically, import weapons would be their own class and not use the crown system, but be as powerful as 5 crowns. The catch is that they are hidden in different military storage units that are safeguarded by strong machines, as these containers could be valuable to Phoenix. So there would be a quest involved to get them. Then you would be earning these weapons instead of just finding them on the ground or in the machines. For World War II, there will be 2 versions. Battle-worn or barely functioning guns that can shoot but needs to be fixed. These would be found in war veterans' homes. The other version is preserved, that can be found in various history museums and are perfectly fine, but don't have the fire mechanism. This gives the player different ways of obtaining these guns while adding world building and giving the crafting system some depth. One final thing is that Generation Zero doesn't need the biggest library of guns, as it could lead to oversaturation, with the possibility of adding more guns that don't fit with Cold War Sweden historically, geographically and politically. Something I believe should be expanded is the gun customization, not with dumb skins, instead with camos that can change the visibility / stealth of the player, and various attachments themed around various factions within the game, visually, statistically and ability. The experimental class doesn't need much more either, as in terms of lore they were designed by FOA, so it would never make sense if there was an experimental M16, unless the US steals Sweden's intelligence and makes their own versions, but then they should at least look different from FOA's red and black design. What I'm doing next. Before I end this video, I'd like to announce what I'm working for. Either during the last days of December or the first month of 2021, I'm going to release a Generation Zero 2020 review where I will go over what's been added and my opinions about the game and what directions I like and severely dislike that the game is going towards.